Hello and welcome to this Friday's Facebook Live with me, Louisa Whitney from LKW Family Mediation, and I'm also live streaming on YouTube this morning as well. So what am I talking about in today's Facebook Live? I'm talking about our latest blog that was published on Monday when I discussed what happens in mediation when you don't resolve all of the issues that you have, or any of the issues that you have. This is something that I think lots of people worry about, and it's a conversation that I have many times with people coming into mediation. If you're going through a separation, then you're likely to be worried about money, because you know that by separating, you've got to create two houses from the one house that you have now. So that is instantly a big drain on the finances, and it's something that people worry about, and entirely understandably, because it is a big thing to have to contemplate. Also, at that time that you're worrying about money, it's a natural thing to think, oh, must try not to spend money, or must be thinking about our expenditure. And yet it's a time when you're likely to incur professional fees, either in the form of solicitors' fees or legal fees, or you may be paying a counsellor. There may be other work that you've had to do in terms of getting information to sort out issues arising from your separation. So when people look at paying costs for mediation, they kind of want to know what happens if we pay this money and we don't resolve things, because then we'll be no further forward, but we'll be poorer. So I think that's a very real concern, and it's one that I definitely understand as a mediator. There is a level of trust coming into mediation, that you're both engaging in the process together to try to find a fair way forward. And trust is something that's really difficult when you separate, because often the trust that you may have had in the relationship has either broken down or it has been severely tested. And so that can make it really difficult for people to trust the other person's, what they say, what their motives are, whether they're really telling them how they feel about things. So it's a very real concern. If you end up in the situation where you have done mediation meetings and you're worried that it is not progressing or that you're not resolving things, then that's something that I would really urge you to have a conversation with your mediator about. I often say to people coming into mediation that the first joint meeting is often about finding your feet with the process, about understanding what's happening, and about opening up a channel of dialogue and really tapping into what it is each other want and what their priorities are. And it's not unusual at the first initial meeting for people to hear things that they didn't know that their ex-partner felt, or that they didn't know they were thinking about, or to understand priorities that they have. They may have thought, oh, I really thought you wanted this, but actually it turns out what you really want is that, and that's a surprise to me. If you're talking about financial issues particularly, often the first meeting also has an awful lot of a list of information that is needed is put together, because quite often it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and you can only see what the picture is if you have all of the pieces in place. So that first meeting can be, right, what further information do we need so that we've got all the pieces so that we can see what the picture looks like. In a second joint meeting, you may not resolve everything, because it can take sort of between 3 and 5 meetings, but there should be progress in terms of finding a way forward together. That might be that you've agreed on a timeline of what's going to happen next. It might be that you have a framework of what arrangements for children are going to look like for you when your children are with mum, when they're with dad. Or it might be that you've started to sketch out where you're each going to live. So you should start to see that there are things that are being put in place. If in a second meeting you really are not on the same page about anything at all, then as a mediator, that is something that I would talk to my clients about and say, look, I can see that this is happening, or I can see that you haven't really talked about this, but there may be something you've both touched on that seems to be a bigger issue that you're not talking about. And I will then talk to my clients about, what do you need to move forward? Is it that things are just too emotional and maybe each of you need to take a bit of time, think about maybe speaking to somebody who could support you, like a counsellor or a therapist or a coach, to try and help you to be in a better place about decision making and about not reacting to things maybe? Or is it that there's something else that you need? It could be that you just don't have enough information to make decisions. It could be that you keep talking about options, but you don't know what those options need you to have. An example of that that's coming to me now is shared ownership properties. If somebody's looking at buying a shared ownership property, but they don't know whether there's any available in the immediate area, then that can stall discussions because you're not sure whether you're talking about a realistic option or not. So my second point would be, what support do you need? What further information do you need if you are hitting a bit of a wall? The third point, which I wanted to make in this live, is that even if you haven't reached a conclusion about any issue in mediation, that doesn't mean that the time you've spent in mediation or the money is wasted. And I think that's a really important point, because sometimes people feel that there's any value if they've actually managed to set out a plan of what happens. In mediation, you are able to hear what each other say, and you're able to air things that you may not have felt able to air before, about how you feel about things or about things you'd like to achieve, or other things that you've been quite nervous about mentioning. So you've had the space to be able to do that. And I really do believe that that is very unlikely to be wasted. Being able to have that conversation and to get a better understanding of how each other feel will really help you however you choose to move forward from that point. So don't see it as, oh, we've wasted, that is time and money. Try to look to what the value is, the conversations that you've been able to have, the understanding that you may have gained about how the other person feels. And it's a point I make quite a lot, but I think it's worth saying here that understanding how somebody feels is not the same thing as agreeing with them. And just because you hear someone and you understand their point of view, it doesn't mean that you're going to agree with them. But if you understand what the other person is looking to achieve and how they feel about things, that can be so useful in helping you to both find a way forward together. So that's another thing that I really wanted to flag in this, that even if you haven't got chapter and verse on what happens next, it may be that you've got the groundwork or the foundations that will enable you to move forward more easily, whether that's in mediation or whether that's using a different process. And I really have seen a number of clients who've come to mediation and then been able to go away and work things out either themselves or work things out with much less input because of the work that they've already done in mediation. If you feel that you are hitting a wall and that you're not moving forward in mediation, and as I've just outlined, you've identified why that is, then you can look at what support you need to help you next. And sometimes the reason that you haven't moved forward is because one person thinks X and one person thinks Y, and neither of you are prepared to compromise. Now, as a mediator, I quite often see situations where one person says X and one person says Y, and they can become very stuck about the fact that there are only two options and it has to be whichever way they feel it should be. I think it's very rarely a situation where there is only one option or the other. Sometimes there is an option that there is another way forward that they might be able to live with. Or sometimes there can be an option that you do X for a bit and then you do Y. So it's difficult to give specifics because there is such a multitude of different scenarios. But I would encourage you to think, well, if we're entrenched because I want one thing and the other person wants the other, is there another way forward that might work for us? Or is there some kind of compromise that we can make? Because compromise is what brings people forward. And certainly one of the things I see in mediation is that compromise, one person making a compromise, then tends to introduce a sort of spirit of reciprocity, whereby the other person says, yeah, okay, do you know what? You have done that. I might make a compromise now. I appreciate your compromise. So that can be really useful. If you feel that mediation is not helping you move forward, then it may be that you need to use another process to move forward. And there are a number of processes that exist to help couples who are separating to resolve all the issues that crop up. And in my initial meetings with clients, I always explain all of the processes, and then I follow that up with a leaflet that includes all the processes. Because mostly I find it's far too much information for one person to take in one go. So it's helpful to have something to look back on, because occasionally you can have a conversation a week, a month down the line, and you think, oh, the mediator mentioned something like that. What was it? And if you've got a leaflet to look back on, that can be helpful. So sometimes changing the way that you're working can be helpful. And sometimes there is an idea that if you don't resolve everything in mediation, then you have to go to court. And that really isn't the case. There are other processes that you can use. And I think there is a pressure on that that's probably unhelpful. I'm not going to go over all the different processes today, but what I will flag is that there are a number of processes which are what I call self-determining. So that's where the two of you make decisions together with different support about what happens next for you and your children. And you make decisions following discussions that are had in a variety of different ways with different support from different professionals. Sometimes people simply can't make a decision, and that can be for a variety of reasons. But where you can't make a decision, you then look at processes where somebody else decides things for you. And that really, it's important to bear in mind that surrenders your control over the outcome. Because if you put together an outcome that works for you, and it may not be your best option, but it may be an option that you feel can work for you, then if you go to an option where somebody else decides it for you, it may be your worst possible option. And it's really important to remember that if you ask a judge or an arbitrator to make a decision about what happens next for you and your children, they could give you an outcome that you really don't like. Even where you are talking about and discussing things and you feel that you're not very happy with the options you're discussing, if you can suggest a compromise, it's a compromise that you've thought up and that could just at a push work for you. If you are asking somebody else to decide, you have no control over where that compromise falls, and it may fall very firmly in territory that you think you would find it difficult to live with. So that's really worth bearing in mind. But there are sometimes circumstances where you feel you've got to have somebody decide things. And if that is the case for you, then your next step will probably be to take some legal advice, if you haven't done already, about what the right way forward is for you. So I hope that gives you a flavour of what happens if you are not able to resolve things in family mediation. And as I've said at the outset of this, I really do want to emphasise that it's a concern that I see a lot coming into mediation, and it's an entirely understandable one. You know, if you are separating from someone, you want to make the best possible use of the financial resources you've got. And if that involves paying a professional, then you want to make sure that you're paying the right professional at the right time, because that's far more likely to help you to move forward. For example, if you are feeling really angry, and that is a very common emotion in a separation, and you are instructing your solicitor to fire off letter after letter after letter to the other person because you really feel so angry about what the other person has done and the way that they've behaved, then that might ultimately cost you a lot of money, but you may find that you don't feel it's abated your anger and that it hasn't really helped you both to move forward, and that actually now you're both in a situation where you have very little communication and you both just feel very angry towards each other. So if you sort of go back to the start of that example, if you were able to take a bit of time to process your anger and to maybe talk about it with somebody like a therapist, then that may be money that is less than sending countless solicitors' letters, and something which may ultimately achieve a more constructive outcome for you. So those are the kind of conversations that I think it's really important to have, and they're conversations that I can and do have with clients in mediation. At the end of this, I also wanted to tell you a bit about my summer programme, because I am going to be taking some time off over the summer. I will be away on holiday from the 29th of July and I'll be returning to the office on the 15th of August. I am scaling down my workload for the summer holidays so that I can take a break and so that I can spend some time with my children. And so I won't be uploading new blogs or doing Facebook Lives in August. If you get my newsletter, then that will be pausing as well, only for a brief period of a few weeks. If you feel that getting resources to help you manage your separation would be useful for you, then you can sign up to the free mailing list that I run that sends you those resources and anything that I think might be useful for you. And you can sign up to that via the link bit.ly/LKW Fam Med List. And if you're a professional that works with couples or individuals going through a separation and you think those resources would be useful for your clients, then I have a separate mailing list for you. And that also includes details of training workshops that I'm running, other events that might be useful, and also the networking events that I run for those going through a separation, or for those who work with those going through a separation. And you can sign up to that mailing list by going to bit.ly/LKW Fam Med Sign Up. Right, that's me. I'm signing off for this week. The sun seems to have finally come out and I hope that you have a really good weekend. Just before I go, I will put the link to the blog in the comments just so that you can have a look at that blog if you haven't had a chance to already. And I'll make sure that that's included with it. So I hope that you have a great weekend, and I will be back. Sorry, I'm just thinking this through in my head. I won't be back next week as I'm engaged in voluntary work all day. So I will put out on Facebook when the next Facebook Live will be, so that you can then come and watch it. But the new blog will be up on Monday. So do have a look at that. Okay, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.